the farming process. And we do this for both imports and exports.
Okay.
And for that reason, we have staff on all the border posts. And our technical definition of a border post stretches beyond what we know as Malaba, Pondwe, Katuna, to include Entebbe International Airport, the post office, and also the Nakawa goods shed, because these are points where some of these products enter or leave the country. Now, during the inspection and certification work at the border posts, we are trying to clear products for export to assure the trading partners that these goods are of good quality. But also, there's a fundamental role we play of checking whatever is coming in to ensure that we don't bring in exotic pests or diseases.
Okay.
But what exactly do we do for inspection and certification? Now, inspection and certification, I'll use seed to illustrate what we do. It is a continuum of processes which are scientific and very well structured. We shall take an example. When Naro, using their scientists, have bred the various improved varieties, which eventually are sent to us as the ministry, and we approve that variety. We get from the breeders, we start following and tracking the quality from the breeders as it passes over to the multipliers, and therefore we keep picking certain critical information along the chain. And while the multipliers have planted these crops in the field to multiply to create seed, we keep collecting data in the process that we call inspection, checking for distinctiveness, uniformity, and stability, up to the point where if we are satisfied with all those parameters, then we certify a given garden. And it is from that garden that samples of seed are collected and taken to our seed lab in Kawanda to check again for further parameters which involve germination test, seed purity, moisture content, and any check of seed-borne diseases. And once the seed passes that test, then we issue a certificate and we allow that seed to be traded on the Ugandan market. So that is, in summary and in simplest terms, inspection is a scientific and structured process where you collect sets of data to help you in a decision making for you to issue a certificate or to reject that lot. So that is what we do for the seed. Mm-hmm. And it would also be, I think, interesting to explain to our dear listeners what we do for inspection and certification on the crops that we either allow to be traded domestically or for export. So for the crops, during inspection, we start at the place of production, that is at the farm level. We would like to know when the crop was planted, what kind of pests or diseases were identified during the growing period, what kind of treatments were applied, if it is a chemical, which chemical, with which mode of action, what was the concentration, the dosage, and how many days was the chemical applied before harvesting, or what we call the pre-harvest interval, because it has a bearing on what percentage of chemical could still be left as a residue. And for exports, we also want to know how was this transported. Is it a cleared transporter who transported? Because we want to avoid situations where a transporter has just previously transported, say, poultry, and then he's now transporting food. And then the pack houses where the grading, the sorting and packing is done. It must be done in a very hygienic environment. Okay. And then up to the point of exit, once all these inspection points, the data sets collected conform to the minimum to the standards as set, then we issue what we call a phytosanitary certificate, which is actually a plant passport to allow these products to be traded with our trading partners. So I think because of time, I may not go through the one of chemicals, but they all work along the same principles, collecting sets of data to inform decision making. Okay. And that's what we do.
Mr. Mwambo, while explaining all that, it's great work. But for a Ugandan out there who is watching, they feel like this is on black and white, it's on paper. Because we've continuously had chemicals, substandard chemicals, or actually fake chemicals onto the market. When it comes to the seed, of course we've had complaints from the farmers on the seeds did not grow, or they're just rotting and all that. How do we even, with all that work that you're supposed to be, why do we continue to see such happening on the market?
Thank you very much, Mildred. Now, the issue of counterfeiting is actually a global phenomenon, and it is not only unique to inputs. We have seen consumer goods you go to buy in the supermarket, ranging from shoe polish, or even hardwares, metallic bars, or even cement, or even human medicines having counterfeits. So it is a global phenomenon which is driven by individuals who want to get quick profits, and it has not spared agricultural inputs. The reason that the outcry will be very hard in agricultural inputs is because sometimes, and in many cases, the lives are directly affected. People have invested money to open the land, they have prepared it the second time, they buy these things, and if they don't germinate, it means that that household is actually literally finished, because they will have food insecurity and there's no financial security. Now, some of this happen because of various reasons. One, the very unscrupulous dealers may collect packaging material of premium products, and they put there the substandard products and offer them sale to unsuspecting farmers. Sometimes they will even go and generate packaging material very similar to a product that is fast selling and what is most demanded. However, we now have got solutions to most of these. One is that we have intensified sensitization, especially of end users, to be able to distinguish fake from genuine. But for many of our products that we are importing out of the country, like the chemicals we use in agriculture, like the pesticides and fertilizers, we now are going to be using a digital tracking system. And this is going
Is that in the future? Is it current?
It's current because we are working with NITA Uganda, the National Information Technology Authority of Uganda. We have hired a consultant who is developing for us a digital tracking system that is going to help us to track especially the imported inputs that come into the country, and even those that are even manufactured here, including the seed. We shall be able to now attach a digital stamp to every package of seed that leaves the seed factory. And therefore, when we go for inspection using a handheld scanner, any packaging that does not have that digital stamp will certainly not be, will be deemed not to have gone through our system, and that will help us a lot. But also, for other imported products like fertilizers and pesticides, like I was saying, we now are insisting on PVOC. PVOC is pre-export verification of conformity, that we want to check the quality from the country of origin. with very clear documentation before things reach here. And we think that, especially with these two, digitizing our business processes and pivot, then we can be able to assure the Ugandan market of quality of these products.
How is this farmer in Nakapiripirit down, my grandmother probably tilling the land, going to receive such information? Because like you said, it is one thing for the product to receive certification at entry into the market, and then it's counterfeited later on after probably its first use, it's counterfeited. But also remember, there are products that are locally produced, but they may not meet the standard to even be traded locally.
Well, those are two questions, I think. One, that those produced locally not to be traded, no, they have to meet our standards if we are to allow them. Like for chemicals, every chemical in this country we release has a product number, and we're able to track it on the market. So that one we can handle. But how somebody in Nakapiripirit can be able to know deep there? One is we have extension workers. And we have now, out of the 5,000 that we should have recruited by now, we have 3,800 in place. So we work as a team, and these extension staff in the sub-counties across the country are supposed to help us to be able to explain to the users, to extend this knowledge to the users. We also use the private sector, the dealers, the people who are in those outlets. Just today, we were having a team of about 100 dealers whom we were training. So these trainings, we keep holding them normally before the planting season, and then also at the end of the planting season as we prepare for another season. Mm-hmm. So there are another pool of extension workers who explain to the end users, the farmer, what this product is supposed to do, and even how to use, the conditions of use, and it's very important. So we believe that through those channels, somebody far from Kampala will be able to get this information. All right.
Maybe at a later stage we'll talk about the farmer extension worker ratio. Right. But let me come back to you, Mr. Piers, Mr. Piers Kasaija. You talked about the National Development Plan 3, and it's about 2 years now of implementation of this NDP 3. And I'm pretty sure that agriculture is a chapter under NDP 3, and there is the agro-industrialization, which is going to be the focus. What progress so far has been made? 2 years down the road, we're thinking about Vision 2040. Why would a Ugandan be bothered? So what?
Mildred, I wish to let you know, after a very long period of time, today, Uganda is over food secure. This means we have more food to eat than actually we need. This is a big success, at least for all the 45 million have food to eat. But above all, when you look at all our exports in agriculture, all indicators have gone up. I'll give you for coffee, for example. The growth is exponential. We've gone to 7 million bags per year, jumping from 3.5 million bags 5 years downwards. So it's moving up. When you look at dairy, which we were talking about before, production has increased. I gave you earlier on the pillars we were talking about.
Yes.
Production and productivity, post-harvest handling with value addition, market access and competitiveness. So I'm trying to explain production and productivity, that all indicators are moving up. And this is very good. Dairy has moved, has actually overtaken tea in terms of value to this country. So when you look at our contribution as a sector, it is making more sense to the country, to the economy, and most importantly, to the farmers. Data. 5 years down the road, we had data indicating we had 68% people who were not in the money economy. Today, this figure has moved. Information we have it has moved to 40%. So this is a good indicator of movement, and people are beginning to move towards what we are asking them to make agriculture as a business. Now, NDP3 is again paying more attention to the value chains, right from the farm to the market, with all the pillars I'm talking about. Now,
Mr. Wakabe, just before you go to the value chain, you talked about producing more than what we can actually consume, meaning it's a good on one side, but on the other side I'm thinking about this farmer who has put in money and produced, but they literally do not have markets because the food cannot be consumed or whatever their product is. But also secondly, I mean, is this based on particular seasons? Because sometimes we've had media reports of people who are starving. There is famine, probably, for example, in areas of Karamoja. So how would a Ugandan out there be correlating that you're saying we have more than we can eat, and yet we continue to also have, you know, pockets of these reports of famine in particular areas?
Actually, you're combining quite a number of questions, but I'll come to the food systems distribution in the country later on. But let me first finish the other point relating to, is it per season or whatever, because after you've produced, what do you do with what you've produced? How do you handle whatever you are producing? That's the post-service handling.
Okay.
To maintain the quality of the product. So government is investing 140 million pounds into post-service handling and value addition. And already, this is already within the country. You asked me what we are doing in NDP3 2 years down the road. When you move around so far, in our project, the Agriculture Cluster Development Project, we are operating in 57 districts where we are working with the private sector mainly, but organized. I told you about organizing the farmers. We are dealing with farmers who are in farmer groups or cooperatives to deal with them. For example, I'll tell you, we are providing them with post-harvest handling equipment, cleaning equipment, drying, storage, and value addition, where government is contributing 66%. And the groups contribute 33%. You remember in September last year, His Excellency the President flagged off a number of those equipments in Namarere here in Kampala. It was run live on this TV. And this project is still ongoing. This project is over $130 million. And farmers are making sense of this. Maybe one day we need to bring some here and they bring out some testimonies. These are making money now. And you know they are involved. These things are not given to them. They contribute towards their their purchase and running them and maintenance. We've seen improvement in their incomes. Results in the research from the baseline is showing differently. But then, most importantly, what goes out to the market? What is the quality? We are paying a lot of attention towards that. The inspection and certification is talking about is in that line. We haven't come with the people for the fish. We haven't come with the people for the animals in terms of inspection and certification, because certification and inspection runs across the 3 departments. But we do a lot of that, and the quality has improved. When I talk about fish, today, fish has picked up. Factories that had closed, we have 4 which have reopened. And all that is making sense because we've minimized the illegal fishing on the lakes. Now, when I talk about the animals, I talked about dairy. Dairy is a key contributor. We're opening up markets. I'm proud to tell you the Algerian government has opened up doors for us, and we shall soon be exporting to Algeria on top of the existing markets. We would like to be feeding the entire Africa, and we can do it. That's why you see us pushing. But most importantly, we're also working on the affordable credit for these farmers to be able to make sense, to deal with agriculture as a business. And again, institutional strengthening and capacity. You talked about food systems. We shall be having the Food Systems Summit in September this year. And one of the key things we are looking at, how do we evenly distribute food in the country?
Okay.
The waste we have is too much. When you look at the waste in Kampala here, most of the food is being wasted. How do we distribute it evenly to areas that don't have? But the good news is, the area we're talking about, Karamoja, has transformed. Karamoja started producing food. It's reducing on the nomadism. So they are producing, we've put infrastructure in Karamoja, water infrastructure, valley dams, and farmers are able, they can be able to grow things around there. We are putting irrigation in those areas. We've improved their breeds. because the small breeds used to see in Karamoja will be history. The goats, we've introduced better early maturing, disease resistant, and with good weight in a very short period of time. So all these are improving on food systems. Believe me, the World Food Program, for example, are now buying food, for example, from Karamoja for Karamoja. And I'll tell you, Mildred, in the entire world, Uganda has the biggest portion of food bought locally for consumption in this world. So it's something to be proud of. And I know Karamoja is very fertile, it can produce. The infrastructure in the road is fine. Today I'm able to drive to Karamoja and I'm back. It means if food is produced in Central, it can be driven to Karamoja, distributed, and people are able to eat it, which wasn't there before. Before I would need like 3 days to travel to Karamoja. Today it is no more. And we've seen businesses coming up in Karamoja, whereby the food can be able to move like that. The same applies to other areas. And now, most importantly, we're also paying attention to the nutrition, not only the food. How nutritious is the food that you are eating? So Naro will tell you, they've come up with varieties which are enriched with micronutrients. And we are promoting this, especially in areas whereby we're seeing malnutrition in this country, to see that we don't have that issue. And we've seen these figures improving over time. Okay. So, okay, thank you.
All right, now you can complete your statement before we just do take a very short break. You had something to conclude, Mr. Wakabi.
I was mentioning that it is really making sense. We've made strides in the NDP3, building on the success of NDP1 and NDP2. Okay. This is the third, and I know by the end of it all, Uganda is going to be very different, and I will assure you, because now we are taking off, the infrastructure is in place, investment is in place, we have more than enough electricity in this country. So it means if I put up an agro-processing facility, I'm able to have the power, I'm able to move it from one place to another, and even to export. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The cost of power would be the other discussion, like the President always says. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're due for a break. Spotlight UG takes a very short break, but when we do return, of course, we will continue. There is the aspect of aflatoxins. The PS talked about earlier on issues of access to credit and insurance. A long time back, we never used to think about agricultural insurance. Is it a reality? How can Ugandans and farmers take advantage of this? This and much more when we do return. Still on UBC and NBS Television.
The livestock sector development form a conversation many Ugandan farmers want to have along with their counterparts, looking at the agricultural industry either as a side hustle or as a retirement plan. This and a lot more another thing, leveraging agriculture to move Uganda to a middle-income economy. As we speak to Pius Wakabi Kasaja, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, Paul Mwambu, the Commissioner for the Department of Crop Inspection and Certification at the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, Dr. Julius Setuwe, the Commissioner for Animal Production at the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, and Dr. Ambrose Agona, the Director General of the National Agricultural Research Organization, NARO Uganda, hosted by Mildred Tuhaise. Crop certification, aflatoxin management, NDP3 and more. Spotlight UG this Monday, 24th May 2021 at 10 p.m. live on UBC TV.
Even when your friends and family are away during this lockdown, let them feel your love and care. Use MTN Momo to send them money. It's safer, cleaner, and now free of charge. Simply dial 165*1# to send money. You can also pay for goods and services using MTN Momo Pay. It's free of charge. Simply dial 165*3# and enter the merchant code to pay. Terms and conditions apply. Stay safe.
Everywhere you go, MTN.
What does it mean to be closer together? It's taking the last bus home for a surprise visit. Closer together is strangers finding a connection. It's bringing home something much more than a box. It's the warmth of home, or the beginning of something new. There's magic in sharing the things that we love, because it's those things that bring us close together.
It's no secret that ICT makes learning easy.
The strides made in our field could not be possible without it.
And now we can watch our favorite show.
My radio is my best friend.
UCC provides an enabling regulatory environment and policy guidance for healthy competition. We also facilitate ease of doing business in the communications sector through licensing, standardization, spectrum management, tariff regulation, rural communication development, and consumer empowerment. An informed consumer is an empowered consumer. UCC supports local content and innovations. Driving the development of a robust communication sector in Uganda is Uganda Communications Commission.
In efforts to improve quality assurance and Uganda's competitiveness as a tourist destination, Uganda Tourism Board is set to undertake a nationwide grading and classification exercise of hotel and accommodation facilities. As a member of the East African community, Uganda subscribes to the East African Grading and Classification Criteria, a system denoted by stars ranging from 1 to 5. The grading and classification exercise will be crowned by the awarding of star ratings to facilities found compliant to the EAC minimum standards. This is therefore a call to all accommodation and facility owners and managers to register and get licensed by UTB as a requirement and get ready for participation. For more information, visit www.utb.go.ug or email qualityassurance@utb.go.ug for details. Uganda Tourism Board, promoting tourism together.
Echa COVID-19 chijja kugwa. If we get vaccinated now, observe social distancing, wear masks properly, sanitize or wash our hands with soap and water regularly. Together we can defeat this enemy.
Form a conversation many Ugandan farmers want to have along with their counterparts, looking at the agricultural industry either as a side hustle or as a retirement plan. This and a lot more, another thing, leveraging agriculture to move Uganda to a middle-income economy.
Livestock utilization in form of consumption in this country. For instance, look in the dairy subsector, Uganda's per capita consumption of milk is estimated at 62 liters per person per annum, and yet the required amount is 200 liters. When it comes to, say, for instance, beef, you look at a consumption capacity, per capita consumption of 9 kilograms instead of 50 kilograms. Now the key question is, we are talking about increasing productivity. What are the interventions in place? Dr. Sentumbwe mentioned 3 aspects. Think about the genetics. When you look at the local genetics that we have, you're talking about the zebu, you're talking about Nganda, you're talking about the Ankole cattle. And at the same time, too, we also know we have sort of like exotic interventions like the Frisian, the Brahman, the Simmental. There are quite a number. But in terms of productivity, are we meeting the target? First of all, look at the genotypes that we have, they're quite low in terms of productivity. The PS talked about abattoirs being open, but you do realize that out of the 4 abattoirs, they're saying we need 400 head of cattle, for instance, per day. And of course, not every bull or every cow that goes there shall actually be taken or be considered. You're saying these animals should weigh at least 300 kilograms at 2 years. But when you look at the genetics, you're saying, for instance, like a zebu, to attain actually 200, even 70 kilograms, you're talking about 5-7 years. You're looking at the Ankole cattle, to attain 300 kilograms, you're talking about 5-6-7 years. So the quality of the meat doesn't meet export kind of standards. So we are saying, what do we need to do right? Mildred, I'll make key observations. Today, Naro boasts of introducing the Viking Jersey breed into the country. Okay. And this cow is small in stature, but in terms of the feed utilization efficiency, is much better than the Frisian that we know. To produce 1 liter of milk by the Viking Jersey, we need about 1-2 kilograms of feeds. But when we talk about the Frisian, to do the same amount, you're looking at 1.7 kilograms. But in terms of the quality of the milk, we are talking just about volume. In terms of butterfat content, is much more superior, talking about 5+ and beyond. But the Frisian is just about 3.5. Now, in terms of, say, like, now we are going into agro-processing. If you want to make yogurt out of it, you need about 3.5 liters of Frisian milk to make 1 liter of yogurt. But for the Viking Jersey, just 1 liter of Viking Jersey milk to 1 liter of yogurt. So apart from just the intervention introducing these breeds, it's quite important too to look at the genetics. But of course, the feeding aspects of it is very important too, the nutrition aspects. Today, Naro boasts of having the biggest collection of pastures in the whole continent. We have 2,000 different kind of species, and it's the 3rd biggest in the whole world. But now the key quality, or the key aspects are looking at the quality of these pastures. At one point or another, you also know that cattle, livestock actually contribute a lot to climate change, especially when they emit methane gases. So we're also trying to evaluate these pastures in terms of capacity to reduce actually methane gas release. Okay. Now, the one fundamental area we can actually boast of right now is the vaccine development. Juliet actually made mention that at the end of the day, to manage most of these diseases, like you're talking about East Coast fever, you're talking about the foot and mouth disease, you're talking about African swine fever. Today I want to present to our country that Naro is in various stages of the development of vaccines. For instance, the anti-tick vaccine, we have come up with 4 different vaccines that control, for instance, against East Coast fever, and especially a particular tick called the brown hair tick, which actually in science we call Rhiphicephalus appendiculatus, but it's actually too technical. Then we also have the Amblyomma variegatum that causes actually heartwater. Then we have Buphilas declaratus.
And I will request that you make those much simpler for the viewer.
Yeah, I'm trying to make it simpler. Watching. I'm trying to make it simpler.
Okay.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we are saying we have quite a number of different species. You need to know actually your enemy. You want to treat it well.
Okay.
So you know, just about a tick is a tick, but they differ in different actually function, the disease they can cause and the like and so on.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, what you have done, we have come up with vaccines which have tested on farm. Now we are making the trial batches actually to go on farm, and we test actually on station. We are now going on farm. Now, what you are looking at, the efficacies of these vaccines. Today, I can tell you, the one that actually produces actually cross-infection, cross-protection against the other species is the one against actually East Coast fever, up to 88%. Even the one that causes like the one of, I don't want to use those names again, the blue tick, that also causes actually 88% reduction in the tick burdens. Okay. So apart from actually the injectables, we also go on the oral vaccine. Today, we are putting up a facility in Nachisasa, and come June 2022, we should have actually been now going into the multiplication looking forward to commercialization of this vaccine within Uganda and within the region.
Okay.
That's one key intervention. Then again, we also built the capacity in terms of human resources for foot and mouth disease. One thing that we also take note of, most of the vaccines that come into this country are due to tell the called quadrivalents. There are 4 different types actually, antigens in it. Yes, but we bring it from South Africa, from Botswana and from Kenya. But you're saying like those the ticks and the viruses that come into this country, especially those antigens, are not effective against our viruses that are here. So what NARA has done a countrywide survey, done the collection, the identification, the serotyping, at least to provide that bank when you start now doing the vaccine, where especially when they isolate the antigens out of them, this will be actually the source of our vaccine against our foot and mouth disease here. Because they say the strains like that effective in Kenya are not equally effective in Uganda here, like the one in Botswana. So we'll have our own to address Ugandan actually problems, but of course they're using our talents to provide solutions to our problems.
Okay.
Then again, we have the African swine fever. We have built human resource capacity up to PhD, and we again also now noting that Uganda is the 2nd largest consumer of pork in the whole world after China. But of course, the issues of African swine fever is a major kind of challenge in both countries. And again, we are saying we are now working also into trying to address the issues. This facility that we are putting up, come June 2022, must be up and functioning. But Mildred, I'd like also to take note that the issue of adding value. Today, again, when you look at the livestock that we have, in terms of productivity, in terms of utilization, again, it's still low. The PS will have told you, today Uganda is not one of the countries that is the biggest exporter of casein. Casein is one of like the proteins actually out of milk. To get actually 28 grams, you need 1 liter of milk, but the milk is just poured away. If you've been to the market now, you find a lot of whey powder. That's an area which is actually more lucrative than even the milk that you see around here. And then again, when you look at the breeds that we have, today we are talking about the Viking Jersey. It has got a different type of casein, the beta casein. This one has got actually in reducing health effects like diabetes, high blood pressure. This is something which actually Uganda still don't know. So we believe our contribution into the realms of science when it comes to livestock production will be seen as real hard-time evidence.
Okay. Maybe just a few before I get to the next panelist. You talked about the Vikings Jersey, which is a new breed. For the people in dairy farming, for the people in livestock, this would be a good way, I mean a good one for reception. But the question is adaptability. Is it a breed that can be able to be, kept across the entire country? Because for many of the farmers, that is where the problem is always. Having the breeds that can adapt to all the conditions across the country, but also the ease of living with these new breeds. We are talking about lay people as well who are engaged in agriculture.
Oh, thank you very much for that question. When you talk about the Viking Jersey, I think it's important to understand the intrinsic quality that it has. First of all, when it comes to heat tolerance, it actually does much better than the Frisian. And then we are saying, like, for instance, at a temperature range of, say, like 26 degrees Celsius, most Frisian animals, for every single degree that increase, it loses close to about 5% of its milk productivity. But the one of Viking Jersey is fairly stable. Then 2, in terms of, there's a disease called mastitis. The breed that we have is fairly resistant to that. But now, once proven that's like adaptable to this country, what will be the strategy, say, like, for instance, of multiplication? Mildred, today I'd like to present to you, NARA has come with the in vitro technology, in which we are going to harvest oocytes, the eggs from the female cows. And each cow has got the capacity to produce close to about 100 oocytes. And then again, we do the fertilization outside, and then we now look for the surrogate mothers. So we are looking from a population of like about 100 times 100, we are looking at doing close to about 10,000 actually Viking Jersey within the year. So this is actually where we are going. But again, look at its size, it's fairly adaptable to actually most of these animals that we have. For instance, you don't want a surrogate mother, whereby like you plant actually in this actually embryo, Then at the end of the day, at the time of giving birth, it kills the mother. The size of the Viking Jersey is actually quite unique, and it's quite small. We're talking about about 350 to 400 kilograms. So that's actually, most animals can take it on board. There's one thing I would like actually to make mention on. Today you mentioned about the effects of climate change in this country. Do you know that at the end of the day, when it comes to also mitigating climate change effects, especially using methane emissions, even these animals are local breeds, much as they're very important in tradition. For instance, the zebu and then Ngana cattle produce 1 kilogram of milk, they actually release also 1 kilogram of methane. The Ankoli breed does much better. To do 1 kilogram of milk, it releases 0.566 kilograms actually of methane. But the improved breeds where we are moving towards now, to do 1 liter, they just release just 0.123. Whereby again, it's saying like, if you can have that genetic kind of gain, coupled together actually appropriate kind of pastures, we can contribute a lot and significant in reducing climate change actually.
What is clear, of course, there needs to be a lot of research, a lot of study before one can actually get into some of these projects. Dr. Juliet, let's speak to some of the interventions that have been put in place to enhance productivity and, of course, also paying attention to aspects of health for the animals.
Thank you, Mildred. One of the issues we already highlighted were some of the interventions like vaccination, but we have also set up laboratories within the country at regional level. I think we have about 12 right now at the regional level, but also some mini labs in some of the districts, and these are essentially meant to diagnose diseases out there. We have, of course, the central lab in Entebbe, but it's certainly not everybody can reach it. So we are trying to get out the facilities to reach everybody wherever they are. So we stop treating anyhow. We should be treating according to diseases that have been diagnosed, so we do the proper treatment. When we simply inject, most of these drugs we do inject, and as you know, most of our farmers do not realize what we call, or do not observe the withdrawal periods. Okay. So the drugs we simply put into our animals, our livestock, eventually end up in the food chain, and we get a challenge of resistance to these drugs eventually when they are given to us. So lab facilities, something that we've put in place, and we still want to improve in terms of putting the equipment and the reagents that are required to do that job. We are also looking at putting in place a fully fledged livestock identification and traceability system. It has a very big role to play, not only in preventing, for example, thefts of livestock, but also tracing our products. The lucrative markets that we are looking into right now to take our products, they always want to trace the product to the source. And LITS, what we call in short LITS, Livestock Identification and Traceability System, will help us to do that, but also to follow the animals. Is this
directory from the farmer at that village trying to rear the goats or cows and
up to the market? So there will be systems to use either through what we call scanning codes or QR codes, so that the animal has that identity up to its product into the market. So you can actually trace a number of the animal to, say, a QR code on a piece of meat or steak onto your plate.
Dr. Juliet, let's break this down for the farmer out there who is watching. Mildred is rearing her goats down in Masindi, and at a later stage, of course, the goats are going to access an international market. What am I supposed to do at farm level as a farmer, or what is expected? What is the ministry? Because when we say there is going to be this, it feels like it's in futuristic tense. What already is happening? Because we're already exporting a bit of these, although we need to expand our markets. Break it down.
Right now, we are piloting that LITS, or the Livestock Identification and Traceability System, in about 28 districts of the country. We have already put in place a draft of what we think a national livestock identification and traceability system should be, an effective one. There have been semblances of it, like in Karamoja, where we have used like boluses to identify these animals for different purposes, but it hasn't been national. So for now, we are piloting the national one, and once now we know what identifiers, for example, should we use ear tags, boluses, what is it, and how do we use it? And how do we engage that farmer you are talking about, right from farm level, to tell them that to use an ear tag with such numbers, and these are the gadgets we are going to use to read that number. So we shall be doing all that sensitization. And the farmers will also be contributing to the identifiers for their animals. So that's the least they can do, identify their animals. But there will be a national system that reads those identities of the animals. That will be managed centrally.
Okay.
So in the system, I would be able to know that this animal is in such a sub-county and belongs to so-and-so. And depending on the different access levels that are given to different stakeholders, you can get the information you want, say on products, on these districts, or which sub-county, what do they own and who owns what. So that is the kind of system we are going to build and we want to be in place.
Maybe in relation to that, there have been lots of discussions about animal thefts. You know, my animals are stolen and immediately they're in an abattoir and the cow is on someone's plate the next minute. Is this system also going to help on traceability with regard to theft?
Certainly.
Okay.
Certainly. Then, because you would be able to look at an animal and know that it comes from such a sub-county and maybe belongs to this person. So it will easily be identified. There will be different codes given to different maybe districts and sub-counties. So even when it reaches, for example, the abattoir, I can easily use my gadget to read and know that actually this animal came from this place. And in fact, in Karamoja, where there are some development partners that helped us with the system, it was mainly very successful to do with preventing cattle thefts, as you know, the cattle rustling that is happening in Karamoja region. So certainly it's not only for disease control, it's not only for traceability of products, but it also helps a lot in stopping thefts of animals. So that is one thing we are also doing, and we think it is going to help us very much. Another aspect that my colleague Ambrose has been talking about, the issue of the breeds. We have put in place liquid nitrogen plants as government, but also several stakeholders, private sector and NGOs putting in place such liquid nitrogen facilities. And we have already bought quality bulls to provide the semen, which we are collecting and keeping for farmers to access. We already have a community breeding program where different farmers express their interest for the different types of semen they want, and we are giving it to them so they improve on the breeds of animals, as Ambrose was saying, to exploit the hybrid, what we call the hybrid vigor, when you cross different types of animals, the exotic and the crosses. So that's what we are doing, and we are training artificial inseminators all over the country. A lot has been in that. We are also, of course, registering them and following up the activities they are doing to ensure that they do it right. We are not only using semen for improving the breed facilities. Of course, there is the usual crossing, natural mating, and we provide the quality bulls for the animals. But we also use other technologies like Ambrose was mentioning. The last technology he talked about is, in short, what we call the embryo transfer technique of producing many, I'll call them eggs, he called them oocytes, but that is the simple language. We already have a regional bank in Entebbe that we were trusted actually as Uganda to hold that regional bank for the Kenya, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. So they'll be collecting their different types of genetic semen, over and whatever, and keeping it in Entebbe. And it is because when they saw the network of our National Agricultural Genetic Resource Center and Data Bank, the different farms we have, they appraised us and they thought that we could do a good job. So we are hosting it, and we shall be having a lot of genetics kept there. And we are doing a lot in ensuring that the farmers improve on the quality of breeds they have, but purposely to produce breeds in collaboration with NARO for a product. We no longer want anybody to just cross anyhow. We want to know niche markets. For example, the Casein was talking about, you can actually breed an animal for good butter fat, so it can give you a particular kind of cheese. Good casein, the bitter casein you want. So we want to do that kind of breeding and produce for niche markets. If you talk about the goat, the milk from the dairy goat, it's very good, for example, for mothers. For example, if they can't breastfeed, it is the next best to the human milk. So we can actually target that milk and produce goats with quality milk for that purpose. Our Ankole cattle, it is known for its good quality meat, low cholesterol levels, and that's where everybody wants to go now. So we want to produce our own brands, for example, and we sell a beef of a steak from Ankole cow, specifically branded, so we can get better money for our products.
Thank you.
So that investment is also in place.
That's great. You know, target breeding, if I would call it so. That
for a purpose.
Yeah, for a purpose. That would be great for the country. Mr. Pius Wakabi, coming back to you, lack of expertise and as well as limited extension services, of course, continue to be some of the challenges in the agricultural sector. Even in as much as more extension workers are being trained, the ratio, like I said earlier on, remains the challenge. As the implementation of NDP3 comes through, how are you looking at this?
Yeah, Mildred, allow me to remind you that we've been listening to a lot of science. But now, let me talk about business. And this is a mindset change I'm talking about, whereby we should be looking at agriculture as a business.
Yes.
That is key and priority on our table. Now, looking at the ratio of extension workers, we are not going as government to provide all extension workers the country needs. We're doing a hybrid, both public and private. I'll tell you, areas where we've got private extension workers being paid for by organized farmers who are doing agriculture business, it is performing very well. I'll tell you the example of the oil palm project in Kalangala. Kalangala at one stage used to be one of the poorest areas. Today, when you see how much those people are earning, they've changed the entire kind of lifestyle. Their children are going to good schools, they can afford good medical facilities, and the like. So the key thing, the model I talked about, to organize the farmers, to do agriculture as a business, is the way to go. And farmers should be ready to pay, or to invest actually, if they are to make money from agriculture. This is the mindset change we're talking about. And consistently, we're teaching our people. The capacity building...
Mr. Wakabi, the farmers out there are also expecting a subsidization from government. So whereas you are telling them to expect to pay, the question would be how much subsidization are we getting from government as a plan?
In fact, I was coming to that. For example, in the value addition I talked about, we are providing facilities whereby government is paying 66%, the farmer groups are paying 33%. We are coming up with a model for extension services. And government is going to be building capacity, providing an enabling environment for the private sector to thrive in the extension services. And this capacity is being built. Even our development partners are supporting us in this line. But you do that where people are seeing money. And anybody to take up that, they would like to go where they know they will make money. And this is what we are doing, creating this enabling environment. I've given you an example of one area, that is the oil palm project, where all systems are in place and they are working, self-sustaining. But there are also others which are coming up in the cotton sector. All that is already going on very, very well. We are planning the same in the coffee sector. We are planning the same, the new enterprises we have brought on board. For example, we brought on board the Hass avocado. We are doing it in a way that we are organizing it right from the onset. The cashew nuts, the macadamia, the high enterprise commodities. Once we do that, farmers will be able to subsidize the extension services because they know the value. Because government may not be able to afford all that the country needs, but want to do it in a way that the products farmers produce are able to give them the money to pay for the service.
All right. Mr. Mambo, earlier on you talked about the inspection and certification, processes that are in place. But how does a farmer access these services particularly? Because they're thinking, the president keeps talking about, agro-industrialization and talks about commercialization of agriculture, and everyone who is joining that sector at the end of the day will be thinking about exporting.
Thank you very much, Mildred. One, and first and foremost, is that these inspection and certification services are free of charge. And how do the various segments along the value chains access this service? I'll give you an example. Like, let's take the example of agrochemicals, pesticides, and the fertilizers. One, we have indicated that we, as a ministry, we have 3,800 extension workers who supply this kind of services on our behalf to our farmers. But also, we know that we may not be able to cover everywhere. So we partner with the private sector to also further deliver these services. We, for instance, our decided strategic direction is to partner with the private sector in the segments where these industries are to be able to undertake what we call self-regulation. We want to go to that direction. So through directly working through government government workers, and also with the industry players, we ensure that these services reach the people.
All right. And also looking at the preset standards for exportation, how more frequent are you engaging these farmers to get in touch? Because also when you talk about exportation, we're not only thinking about, the farther countries, we're looking at even the regional countries. And sometimes we have challenges that we will have, buyers from Kenya crossing directly into the country and buying these products. And when they get to Kenya, you're told they have aflatoxins, you're told they have these and these issues, and therefore rejected much later on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mildred. I think that's a very good question. Under the World Trade Organization, each country, each market sets the standards of what should be acceptable in their area. And it is our duty, because one of the things I did not mention is that by virtue of the office I hold as commissioner in charge of crop inspection and certification, I automatically am also the NPPO for Uganda, which is the National Plant Protection Office.
Okay.
Now, those standards, before we export anything to those markets, we get in touch with them to know what their standards are. And we guide the producers to make sure they meet those standards. Because as we go through our processes of inspection and certification, we are actually appending our signatures on the phytosanitary certificates, indicating that these products do meet the standards as set in your country. And it's what gives our trading partners a statement of comfort to be able to accept our goods. However, should they reach there and they also do an independent check and they do not meet the required standards, then that's where sometimes we get what we call interceptions. And these interceptions can be sometimes on grounds of just improper documentation. You can imagine if you are traveling, we say this is a plant passport. If your passport, as a human being, you are moving and it has issues, you will be intercepted and you may not be allowed to proceed in your to your destination. So equally with our plants and plant products, if documentation is not proper, it can lead to an interception.
Okay.
If they find a pest which is of quarantine importance in the destination market, it can cause an interception. If they take tests and find the pesticide residues are higher than what is acceptable for daily human intake, it can cause an interception, or if it is an aflatoxin, like in the recent case that many of us are aware of.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now that you hinted on aflatoxins, let me come to Dr. Ambrose. This is a discussion, it's a statement, a word that has come through severally, but more pronounced in the recent past when Kenya, rejected our maize. And the discussion that came through in part of, the altercations was, but this is the same kind of food that the Ugandans eat, so how comes you're saying it is bad for your people, and yet we eat it as Ugandans before we bring it up? But first of all, just to break it down easily for the people watching, what are these aflatoxins? How dangerous are they, not only for the health, but also for the economy?
Okay, thank you very much, Mildred. And when we talk about science, we use words which actually has got to be broken down in these simplest terms.
Okay, we'll try as much as possible.
We are talking about aflatoxins.
Yes.
Basically, we are talking about poisons that are produced by moles, okay? And these are like called fungi in our language. But it's important to let the public know there's one particular mole called Aspergillus flavus that produces aflatoxins. Aflatoxins, when they're in the grain, in the feed, you can't see it with your naked eye.
Okay.
It's, you can't taste it, it's tasteless, it's odorless. So now the most important thing is, even if it has reached its lethal amount, you may take it unknowingly and you die. Now, talking about standards, there's a standard set by what we call the Codex Alimentarius. These are internationally recognized standards, codes of practice, guidelines, and recommendations that pertain to food production, food labeling, and safety. So now when it comes to aflatoxins, we are looking at a level whereby they have set any crop commodity, including even milk, even eggs, if the amount surpasses 0.5 microgram per kilogram to 15 microgram per kilogram, you also hear words like 15 parts per billion. We are just trying to now downscale it to the language you understand.
Okay.
It will be actually quite detrimental to take it. For instance, in milk alone, if it's 0.5 parts per billion, that's really dangerous. What is it known to cause? One, there's the issue of liver cancer. In Uganda, here it is estimated that close to 3,700 actually persons die of liver cancer. But then again, we talk about aflatoxin, it also causes actually stuntedness. You are fairly tall enough, I don't think you suffered from it, and like all the panelists here. Then again, there's retarded growth and development in both, say, animals and even human beings. So now the most important aspect, what do we know? What can we say about it? Its impact on the health, its impact on the economy. Mildred, I'd like to share with you that aflatoxins, because of its occurrence in this country, we lose close to about $38 million per annum due to its presence on our grains. For instance, in the year 2018, we lost close to 180 billion shillings when we couldn't export 600,000 metric tons of maize to Kenya. But there's hope that we're coming up with. There are technologies that we're developing. For instance, what's now on the market, you're talking about the FlaSafe. In the area of the fungi, where the molds occur, there are two types. There's one which is non-poisonous, Aspergillus flavus, then the poisonous one called also Aspergillus flavus. Of course, they use the word atoxigenic, that one is actually non-poisonous, then toxigenic, the poisonous one. We do realize how to research that the atoxigenic, the non-poisonous ones, in the same environment, they can't live in the same house actually with the poisonous one. the one which is non-poisonous will outcompete the poisonous one. So what are we doing? We are saying, like, if you denature, for instance, sorghum grain, you dry it out or you roast it, then you impregnate with the spores of the non-poisonous aspergillus flavors, and then you sow in the field at the rate of 4 kilograms per acre or 10 kilograms per hectare, you can actually reduce aflatoxin issues by 80 to 99%. This has happened in Uganda. And what NARA has done, we have identified 2 of those toxigenic aspergillus flavors, and we are putting up a processing facility. Hopefully, come mid-2022, we should likely be in the production, commercialization of Aflasafe technology. I also want to make mention that also, like, aflatoxins occur in animal feeds. We have been able to use what we call calcium bentonite to absorb the aflatoxin in the feeds. You put 1 kilogram of the calcium bentonite to 100 kilograms of the feeds, and then the bentonite will absorb we call it sequestration in our language. Apparently what is formed is not digested and it's excreted by the animal. Okay. So we are able also to provide hope in that dimension.
Maybe in just a bit, what are the best management practices that farmers need to take through? Because out of the discussions, the problem always is pointed to post-harvest handling and storage.
Yeah. Yes. That's one big misconception that people have, that aflatoxin just occurs during the time of drying, during the time of actually storage. But the story begins in the field.
Yes.
So like you're saying, after managing it in the field, by the time you come to dry, we are also saying don't dry on bare ground, don't dry on the roadsides, like I've seen when you travel to Mbale, you see actually cassava, maize being dried by the roadside and so on. Still you can actually pick some residual amounts of aspergillus from there. So what you're saying is dry on topline, dry on canvases, dry on stabilized actually drying surfaces, never on bare ground. But then again, when you're drying, the moisture content of your produce shouldn't be more than 14%. And then again, where you're going to store it in a room or in a store where you don't put it directly on the floor, because grain is a living material. It still actually respires, releases actually moisture. If you put in bare ground, there's no proper aeration. You can still pick up on those molds. So it's like a combination. Today again, you'll hear, like, in big companies like Mandela, they're using what they call ozonation. They're talking about the mold scrub and so on. That one I wouldn't actually engage you in that, not until I really have the hard evidence that it works. But they're using the approach, the use of Aflasafe, and proper drying and storage kind of conditions to alleviate the problem of aflatoxin contamination in this country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ambrose. I'm looking at the time, and it's really getting fast spent, and yet the discussion is getting even better. But Dr. Juliet, you talked about the idea, not idea, but that's a reality, that about 60 to 70% of the cost when it probably comes to animal production is in feeds. That is very expensive. That reduces the profit margin of the farmer. One, how can we better this aspect? Because these feeds are very expensive. Sometimes they are not as safe, as Dr. Ambrose has clearly stated. And also there is what has come through as being called feedlotting. If you could just break that down a little bit for the farmer, and how best they can be able to maximize profits by reducing on the cost of feeds.
Okay, thanks, Mildred. I want to start by saying that the cost of the feeds will also much depend on where you are located and where your source of feeds, where you are getting your feeds from. For example, there are areas where we know that there is a lot of grain production. So if somebody, for example, set up a facility for processing feeds in that location, you can already say that from the beginning your costs of production will be low, because first of all, they are near you. So that is one aspect. Being near the source of the raw materials. And that's why we are encouraging investors to put up those facilities near the source of the raw materials, because even the transport will increase on the cost of production, and that is very critical. So that's one thing. But also, we also need skilling. We have realized that many people actually, we may not have many experts, nutritionists, who we call proper nutritionists in this country. So we need a lot of training for our farmers and other stakeholders to know the different kinds of feeds out there, and then work out the least cost feeds to give their different types of stock. That is very critical. And Uganda is endowed with many, many feed resources. There are even those we have not exploited. You may find that, for example, most of our, the biggest, best raw material in the feeds we give to our stock is maize. But even us, we eat the maize.
Yes.
So that already puts up the cost.
Yes.
So that's when my colleague here now comes in to do research in the other alternatives that may actually not be at competition, say, with the humans. And we have plenty. There are many leftovers, for example, in the kitchen, in the garden, the husks we get off the beans and the peas after we've gotten out our seed. But they need to be exploited, and they need to tell us what are the nutrient contents of those different types of feed materials. So we calculate what we call the least cost feed. That is very, very critical, and we are working keenly on that with the researchers to find out what are the least cost feeds for the different types of stock. Now, we are also endowed with the fact that we have plenty of pastures around. And you know, if we're talking, for example, about the cattle, their biggest, best feed is best there. And it would be very cheap to exploit. So we need to do pasture development, and they will tell us which are the best forages with the nutrient dense, depending on the stock we are talking about. So they are the ones we promote. They are the ones we produce seed for. They certify the seeds for us, and then we give them to the farmers. Those are the projects we are working on in the ministry, so that we do multiply. Many of our farmers simply let their stock, especially the cattle, to what God has provided. But that is very expensive because the nutrients are not there. So you take long, as you had, 7-6 years to reach the market weight. We can't afford that anymore. But there are many varieties of good quality fodder, the grasses that we can actually plant for our animals, and that is what we are promoting under the different programs. Okay. So that we put in least cost. Now, the feedlots. Currently, there are abattoirs that are being put up. Investors have put up abattoirs in Nakaseke, Bombo, Chiruhura. So we want to put animals to those abattoirs, the animals we was talking about. So we are encouraging breeders, and we want people out there, especially those who have the land to afford, to go into investment in looking after animals, keeping animals, because we want good breeders that are going to work with the National Animal Genetic Resource Center and Data Bank, what we call nucleus breeders. They work with them, exchange animals, select and get good breeding stock to give to others. The others they'll give to what we call the multipliers, so that they will multiply many more animals that will have to go to the abattoirs if we are to sell meat within here, within the region and outside. We also want the fatteners, the feedlots you talked about, because within the feedlot you provide feed when the animals are stationed. They don't move a lot, so you minimize on the energy loss because they are not moving, so they grow faster. But now you have to invest in the feed resources that you are going to give to these animals. You can cut and carry the grass, you can mix what we call total mixed rations, and if you are going to invest in a feedlot, you need the best nutrients within the forages or the feeds you are going to give to those animals. Okay. So that they spend less time. The less time they spend in the feedlot, the more profits you are going to make. So we are calling on, and there are already investors actually that have put up feedlots on their own, and we are working with them, and we want many more to put up feedlots so we can have like a regular supply of animals to the abattoirs.
Thank you, Dr. Juliet. Our time is really first spent, but let me come to you, Mr. Piers. Mr. Wakabi, on the aspect, one other key aspect of agricultural credit and insurance that you talked about. Case scenario, a farmer plants, they have borrowed some money because they wanted extensive agriculture, and boom, there is a hailstorm. What next? Aspects of insurance and also the credit that seems to be available for many of the farmers, you know, listening to the conversation, seems to be available to the MSMEs. What about this farmer who has 1 acre, 2 acres of land? How are they able to access this credit because they may not meet the standards to get a credit, for example, from UDP?
Mildred, the starting point I talked about earlier on is organizing these farmers. And maybe what I didn't mention in that in this program approach, we are working with different sectors. It's multi-sectoral. We are working with Ministry of Trade and Cooperatives, working with Ministry of Water and Environment, Ministry of Local Government, where these farmers are, Ministry of Finance for the funds. So we need to organize these farmers, and we've started organizing them because agriculture, we've noted, you can't produce profitably when you are working alone. I talked about the primary production, which is scattered in the country. We would like to congregate all this in a place whereby it can make sense. Once we've organized these farmers, they are capable of accessing this credit when they are organized as a group. Already the government, what is on the plate today, we have the agriculture credit finance with Bank of Uganda. Farmers are accessing it. In the year 2019, at the end, we were able to see the farmers who accessed it, the banks which performed very well in that facility, but we are saying that is still expensive. And Ministry of Finance is coming up with a policy which they are going to present to Cabinet for approval, whereby we would like to see this facility getting below 10%, such that it makes more sense to the farmers. Once the farmers are organized, the agro-industrialization we're talking about is going to be put around those farmers who are organized, because the ones who are organized are able to at least produce the raw material which is going to be supplied to the off-taker or to the processor. Then government will be able to come in to subsidize the critical farm inputs also in an organized way when farmers are organized, because we know they can produce something that is going to be taken to the market and for the market. This applies to the insurance. But as long as we keep these farmers scattered, we're not going to succeed. The same to the agriculture credit I'm talking about, which must be low. So this is the task we're working on with our colleagues in Ministry of Trade and Cooperatives, and we are moving on, and we're sensitizing farmers to go back in these farmer groups or cooperatives. I told you about already in the agriculture cluster development project, how we are facilitating these farmers, how they are organized, and they're making money in a manner which I've explained here in this model. So it makes sense. Once the policy comes out, we believe more farmers should be able to access, but there's also sensitization. We don't have yet enough extension workers. Farmers are not aware of this facility. This facility is there in many banks, and really farmers who have gone with sound business cases, they have been able to access, and they can give testimonies, only that the knowledge is not yet enough. And we are really working on this with Ministry of Trade to say at least farmers are aware to go as a collection to access these services.
In just less than a minute, break down agriculture insurance for the farmer out there, because many people are used to insurance, maybe being for health, car insurance, property and stuff like that. Agriculture insurance is a new phenomenon in Uganda and not yet taken up by many.
Yeah, it's true. We are, I would say, in pilot phase, whereby we are being supported by our partners, the World Bank, within the Ministry of Finance. It's like how you would insure against any risk. For example, if at all bad weather came up and your products were damaged, the agriculture insurance would be able to compensate you. That's the way the bankers would be assured of giving you credit, and they would be assured of you being paid. And that's one of the ways how the credit rates go down, because they know either way they would have their money paid. But you can only achieve this through organizing the farmers, which is very, very important, and we are working on it. And these farmers are all for fish, crops, and animals, and I believe we are going there.
Okay, thank you very much. Our time is really fast spent. We'll need to be giving our closing remarks. But let me start off with you, Mr. Mwambo. With regard to crop inspection and certification, what more do farmers need to know? How do they get in touch with the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries to ensure that we are aligned before interception of the products that are already produced?
Thank you very much, Mildred. What the farmer needs to know is that globally, and there is no excuse whether you are on top of Mount Elgon or you are somewhere in the plains in Gulu, as long as you're a farmer and you're producing food which is going either for domestic market or international market, today issues of food safety are critical. So if your products are going to be accepted on market, food safety issues must be taken as very key on the agenda. And that's why we are engaging with the extension workers, with the private sector service providers to ensure that food safety right from the farm to the fork is taken care of. Because there are certain aspects, if they go wrong at farm level, you may not be able to correct easily upstream towards the fork. Then we also, the farmer has to know very critically that we are competing for regional and global markets. And since it is a competitive world, the one who produces the best quality is the one who maintains their market share or penetrates to new markets. And because we are under obligation not to trade our plants and plant products with pests, they must know how best to manage these pests at farm level. Yeah. Because any product going with any of those pests or with any contaminants will certainly be destroying our reputation on the regional and global market. So the farmer at that point must know those two critical aspects if we are to be able to do our business profitably. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Mwambo. Dr. Ambrose, as you give your closing remarks, also I would like you to highlight how your strategic plan as NARO is encompassed or in line with the National Development Plan 3.
Okay, thank you very much, Mildred. I think as part of my closing remarks, I'd like to make a statement that actually poverty is by choice. And the good book tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 4 to 6, that there should be no poor people amongst us. God gave us the land, the good soils, the good weather, good intelligent people, good promoters like you. So I see no reason why we should actually be poor. But of course, the book also tells us we shouldn't be tight-fisted to the needy people. So you and me have a role to play in actually getting rid of poverty in this country. Now, when we talk about the NARO strategic plan 2018-2019 to 2027-2028, we are looking at 4 strategic areas. Okay. 1, we are talking about the identification of those niche markets. Side that all our research efforts, we are saying the market takes priority. Then again, you look at the development of those technologies, innovations, and services that suit actually the industries in the name of promoting agro-industrialization. But it's also quite important to take note, we also need a very healthy population. So the aspects of food security, the aspects of nutrition security, and health security is very important. Then again, we are saying the third aspect, let the technologies and innovations that will be produced by NARO be promoted. Let it reach to the communities. Today you're talking about the traditional extension system. We also say like a hybrid, if the public, private kind of extension systems, let it reach out to the people. Then fourthly, we are talking about institutional actual establishment, institutional actually building. We are saying we are going to build bridges where they've never existed before. For instance, the public-private partnerships is key. And as I mentioned earlier on, there's no single institution that can work alone and deliver it all. We expect partnerships, especially in the area of technical expertise. We are looking at the aspects of commercialization. Then you're looking at the aspects of resource mobilization. Work with us, cause the demand, we shall deliver and respond accordingly in equal measures. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Ambrose, and I'll of course as well be taking the final remarks of you, Doctor, as well, to give us what you think, what next, what should be our next course of action as well. Dr. Juliet.
Our next course of action, I want to call on all our current and prospective interested parties in promoting the livestock subsector to have strong enterprise platforms, cooperatives as the PS was indicating, because these platforms that put you together enable you to have effective service provision, advocacy for your cause, and collective bargaining. We want to call on you before you do invest in a sector that we have actually said that can make you have very quick returns, but before you go in there, have an effective cost-benefit analysis before any investment so that you can assess where you get the best returns, depending on the conditions where you are. Because these vary, they are not the same, even if you are dealing in a similar enterprise. We want you to seek for knowledge and learning, because learning does not end. Every single day new technologies are coming up. Share information so that you use the best practices for investment in whatever enterprise you want. And sustainability is very, very critical, and preservation of our resources for now and for the future. And always remember, prevention is better than cure, and it is the cheapest way of going about the livestock business.
Of course, thank you very much. And finally, of course, we'll be closing it off with the Permanent Secretary, but it's the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries. It would be a disservice to leave without hinting a bit about fisheries. And this I'll be taking from the questions. One is asking, who is responsible for the poisoning of our lakes in Uganda? I think referring to, you know, instances where we had a lot of fish on the lake shores, and there was a lot of speculation about what exactly happened. And another one, the others that seem to be related is, I am a farmer, can you give us ideas that what we can farm exotic fish breeds in our ponds? Because definitely another question was on the poor breeds and expensive feeds as well for aquaculture here. If you could just respond to those few and then give us your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Mildred. I want to start by mentioning that no one has poisoned the lakes. Information and evidence that we have as a ministry does not suggest that.
Okay.
What we found out, we tested the water, we tested the fish, there was no poisoning, but the death during that time was attributed to the changes in the weather, which led to the reduction of oxygen in the waters, which led to the death of some fish, and specifically, this was the death in the Nile perch. If it was poison being put in the water, we would have seen other species die. For example, the tilapia, the silverfish dying, and all the others, but it was only the Nile perch which was dying, and this happens actually every year. In Uganda, it's called Akalilo. It happens, though this time it was extensive, combined with the rising water levels, which are high, as you are aware, due to the increased water which is flowing in the Lake Victoria. So that's what happened. We tested the water, we tested the fish, there was no evidence of poisoning. If anybody could come up with this evidence, we shall investigate it and we shall be able to inform. Okay. Now, the poor ideas on getting exotic fish. Now, introducing any species in the country requires research. And right now we are doing research on a number of fast maturing exotic fish. and eventually I think it will be introduced to the market. Why do we do conduct research? Some fish can make the other native species get extinct if you don't manage them. And others come with diseases that can wipe out your entire fish stock. So we quarantine, we conduct research, and we are doing that in Kajansi. And once we come up with the good species, and already NARO is doing breeding in Kajansi for the ones that we are rearing locally here. So we believe once we are through, we are going to be giving them better fish which matures fast. But most importantly, most of this fish that does not mature, that gets stunted, is due to poor feeding. You heard doctor saying, one is the breed. For sure, the breeds we have, we've seen farmers that can have the fish get at least 1 kilogram in 8 months. We have them here locally. But we've also got others who can't raise 1 kilogram in even over a year. That is mainly attributed to the feeding. But at the end of the day, farmers may not know what it is. If you can get the good breeds, we have them in this country. We have the farmers who have invested in the fry. You can go get them, feed them properly, get the knowledge. We advise the farmers to get the knowledge on how to feed the fish before they go into the business. Now, if somebody wants to go into fish farming, like I said, consider it as a business. Get all the information, do the research. And this business has science behind it, and this science is available. We urge the farmers to get this information from the extension workers and even the ministry. And we've tried as much as possible to put even a lot of information at the districts. You find this information, and on the website this information is available. But most importantly, look out for the extension workers to get guidance before you go into this business. Like that, you start, by the way, you even start with the market in mind. Don't just hear you will make money from the fish and just go into it. Start with the market in mind. Where will I sell these products? Then you are able to know the other practices before you go into the business. Then the expensive feeds. Yes, today, most of the feeds which are very good are imported from outside countries. But in the agro-industrialization agenda, our key agenda is to make sure this country is #1 in production and export of high-quality animal feeds. Because we've gone into even extensive growing and promoting enterprises that add the ingredients onto the maize. For example, the oil seeds, like the soybean, you are aware of the soybean, sunflower, the cotton. There's a project which is going to be launching out soon. Once that comes out, they come out as byproducts of the oil. But again, they are inputs into the feed, the animal feed industry. So you'll be seeing a lot of this coming up, and the factories coming up to see that at least we are feeding our animals with high quality feeds and even export. Our maize will be history. We shall not be selling it as a raw maize. It will be sold as a finished product, either for human consumption or high quality animal production. So in that line, we believe even the fish feeds will be produced locally and the prices will go low.
Okay. Your final remarks in just a minute as we get out.
Yeah, now final remarks. I wish to advise our dear farmers. You've supported us as a sector. We thank you. You are not to blame for the knowledge that you don't have. We are the ones to blame for not giving you the information. But we are giving you the information now. It may not appear at the same time, but start with the market in mind. Whatever you're going to do, where you're going to sell it. Get the right information. If it is crops, the agronomy. If it is animals, get to understand all the measures. The doctor has talked about biosafety because the diseases are killing us. If it is the fish, get to understand the feeding. Where am I going to get the right fly to use on my farm? Otherwise, agriculture is profitable. Go into it when you know what you are going for. Do it right. You make money. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Pius Wakavika-Saita, who is the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries. We also had Mr. Paul Mwambu, who is the Commissioner, Department of Crop Inspection and Certification at the Ministry. We also did have Dr. Juliet Sentumbo. It's been a pleasure having you. She is the Commissioner for Animal Production at the Ministry, and also the Director General of the National Agricultural Research Organization, Dr. Ambrose Agona. It's always a pleasure having a discussion on a sector that we live on. We're seated on agriculture. I always love to say that. We dress agriculture, we eat and breathe agriculture, and therefore it's definitely a part of us. We cannot continue with this conversation, but two key aspects I take out of the discussion. One is, if you need to start with the market in mind, like the permanent secretary said. And secondly, passion. In agriculture, in farming, you need to have the passion. Maybe I could add that you need to have the patience as well if you join in this particular sector. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion. To our online audience, we don't take you for granted. Thank you, UBC Television, Inspiring Uganda, for ensuring that this is as well broadcast live, and NBS Television. Spotlight UG tonight comes to an end, but we can clearly say good morning because it is already Tuesday. And to our panelists, thank you for coming through. God bless you.
Sector development form a conversation many Ugandan farmers want to have along with their counterparts, looking at the agricultural industry either as a side hustle or as a